So when and how did the Texas Rangers become such an important part of Texas history? To answer that question, let's turn back the clock to the early 19th century, when much of what we now know as the southwestern United States was the northern part of Mexico. The territory that would one day become the state of Texas was a Mexican province known as Tejas. It was a rugged and sparsely populated wilderness. To attract settlers to the area, the Mexican government offered land grants, free land, to people who would migrate there, establish a colony, and agree to be citizens of Mexico. In 1821, Stephen F. Austin took up that offer. At the age of 27, he assumed his late father's contract to be an impresario and led the first Anglo-Americans into the territory, establishing colonies in the river valleys of the Brazos and Colorado.
Most of the people who came to Austin's first colony were farmers. They had worked plantations, of course, being the South. The cotton was the primary economy. But a good number of them were actually quite educated. There were surveyors and lawyers and professional people. A lot of them were not well prepared for the frontier. They knew how to farm, for instance, but they certainly weren't prepared for hostile Indians. So it was very much a new experience for a lot of these folks.
A variety of native Indian tribes had called this land their home for generations. And although some welcomed the settlers, many of these tribes fought the newcomers, launching frequent and violent raids on the colonies.
So all you have to do is picture yourself having to scratch a living from the woods with the threat of hostile natives jumping out of the tree line, shooting arrows at you. You can picture their terror just by injecting yourself. What would you do?
To protect the settlers, the Mexican government authorized funding for a militia. 10 colonists volunteered, but Stephen F. Austin saw the need for more. In a letter to the government, he asked for another 10 men to act as rangers for the common defense. This is the earliest documented use of the term rangers in Texas. These 10 volunteers are considered to be the founding fathers of today's modern rangers.
They used their own equipment, they used their own horses, fought on horseback, came together as need and disbanded when they weren't needed. In Mexican Texas and Spanish Texas before that, there was a long history of just such militia companies. They were called Compañías Volantes, formed for defense, but also to pursue Indians who were raiders.
Not only did that institution of the Compañía Volante, the Flying Squadron, come to Texas, but Spain and Mexico had begun to actually stop using it because they were becoming more established, while Texas remained a frontera, a very hostile, violent frontera, a vast frontier. So the Compañía Volante did not only exist, it was perfected here in Texas. The primary opponent was the Comanche Indian, very highly mobile, guerrilla tactic, hit and run raids that the Anglo-Americans simply, their methods were simply not effective against.
Just defending your farm from an Indian attack was very little utility because the Indians could strike and run away.
The Americans were accustomed to hiding behind something or in a trench, literally digging bunkers and trenches before the battle and entrenching themselves, a very static method of warfare.
The Anglo-Celtic settlers, quite naturally, went to somebody who had some experience fighting these people. And these were the Spanish and Mexican flying companies.
The early Texas Ranger companies, the flying squadrons that the Anglo-Americans established, also had Tejanos, even in the Anglo-American colonies. And we have cases in which the Anglo-Americans wrote about the specific skills that they learned from the Tejanos.
People who became Texas Rangers certainly had some good teachers and mentors. The best of the Ranger captains learned to listen to these people and respect their advice. This Spanish-Mexican tradition of the flying companies is melded and incorporated into what becomes the Texas Rangers.
By the late 1830s Anglo-American Ranger companies were probably indistinguishable from the Tejano Compañía Volante in their methods and their writing. Not simply waiting to be attacked, but offensively seeking out the enemy and then pursuing the enemy until they engaged and only one person survived. Perseguir y batir. Pursue and strike.
It was necessary to pursue them. In order to inflict any kind of defeat on them, you had to follow them to their camp and surprise them, just like they would creep up and surprise you and your neighbors. And that's what these ranging companies brought that was different. And the Rangers were the first ones to sort of accept combat on the natives' terms and master it.
As the early ranging companies became formalized, Tejanos and Indians would ultimately join ranks and ride side by side with Anglos. Their combat, horsemanship, and tracking techniques would become legendary.